This is the view from the nanny's cabin. This is where they show you the short informational video before you actually start your tour throughout the house. Now, the nanny was in charge of taking care of the children, so it makes sense that her cottage was pretty close to the main part of the house. The door that you can clearly see here leads back into the main part of the house. There's a door just to the right, which actually leads directly into the children's bedroom, which is pretty important because that's who she was supposed to be taking care of. Here I'm standing at the base of the stairs for the kitchen, which is really strange for me that it's down in the basement. You only have like one window but 3 doors to get into it. And like I said, the stairs were ridiculously narrow. Here I'm standing in the dining room at the top of the stairs that lead down into the kitchen. This is one of the best lit rooms in the entire house. I think it also, with that, has the most windows in the entire house, like for a single room. So the patrons, as well as the family that lived here, they would all eat in the same dining space, different times. So you have a section of the table over underneath one of the windows that would help expand the table for more guests. Posted on the wall in the study were 3 letters, as well as examples of stamps. The stamps pretty much look like what we still use today, which I think is kind of strange and kind of awesome at the same time. This is a case with just everyday items. Up at the top, you've got some things for beekeeping. At the bottom, you have a waistcoat, things for fanning the fire. The crazy looking thing right there is for fishing. Just everyday items that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So here I'm standing pretty much in the parlor. This is where the family would entertain themselves and sometimes guests. The table there is marble tabletop. What I find kind of cool is before AC, these houses would get really hot, especially in the summer. And so that marble tabletop would stay significantly cooler than the air around it. So just kind of like place your arm on the top of the table and it's like instant AC.
So I kind of wanted to go in the attic, but that's gonna be a no-go because the whole light situation.
Because I grew up on horror movies and it told me not to.
Yeah, that too.
So this is where laundry day happened. It's a little strange for me to think about washing clothing outside, especially as you can see, there's a lot of dirt around. So I would be, a little upset if I just washed clothes and got dirt all over them. It's a little hard to see, but behind it, there's a structure that has then been altered for a pump, but that is where you would retrieve the water. So as you can tell, I'm recording this after the fact. I was having some issues with my camera, with recording things. So I figured it would be a much better use of time to just kind of hold it all in and use my computer when I got home. So one of the first things that I did notice going throughout the entire house is how incredibly warm it was. So this was the first day of fall. It wasn't a particularly hot day. Wasn't super cool either. It was comfortable outside, but in the house, it was warmer than I would have liked. Now this is even with some of the renovations. They do have some box fans going in a few of the rooms to help kind of keep air circulating, and I'm sure that while you had individuals actually living in the house, they probably had the windows open more often to have the air actually completely circulating through the house, so it would be similar to having the box fans going to actively move air. But still, it's hot, and all those layers of clothing, especially that the women had to wear, I probably would have been a melted puddle of sadness. I don't do well with heat. It's not my thing. But of course, it was one of the first things that I noticed just because of how uncomfortable it made me. One of the other kind of weird things that I noticed was how incredibly narrow all of the staircases were and how high all of the steps were. So I'm not particularly coordinated on stairs. And then I'm just also thinking in those dresses that at the time I would have had to have worn, and heels. I probably would have died on those stairs. Like, done, over with. Um, so, like, those are things that from a personal standpoint, I was like, okay, it's not my jam. Was not meant to live in that time frame. To go along with things that would have affected me personally. I love to cook, like, that's my thing. So, to one, have to go down the super steep stairs if you're already in the house to get into the kitchen, I probably would have broken my neck. Stairs and I don't get along. But then to see basically what you have to cook with is the fire and hearth. Now you have tables and stuff to prep on, but all of your, like, all that you have to cook on is that fire. And fire is not the most forgiving thing. So I found it kind of interesting that, there was just the one window, but you had 3 doors. And so it was basically like, if one, it gets hot because you have fire, but then also if something goes wrong with the fire, you can get it out of the house very quickly, so you're not gonna, burn down the entire house because you're below the dining room. But it's just one of those things that I don't really think about until we had the hurricane where we didn't really have power. So, like, I had to figure out, like, okay, how would I cook this? That's not something you particularly think about unless you absolutely have to, because we've pretty much all grown up having some sort of electric or gas stove and oven in the house that is just like, oh yeah, you just go into the kitchen and just, turn it on, get some water boiling, make some mac and cheese, you're good. And when you have a fire that you have to get started, and then you have to go retrieve the water from outside because you don't have indoor plumbing, and then you have to wait for that water to heat up over that somewhat uneven fire, and then you can boil your macaroni. But then you also have to figure out, like, how can you maneuver another pot in there to make your cheese sauce for your macaroni and cheese. So, mac and cheese was much more difficult, and that would make me sad, because I like me some mac and cheese. But so, like, with that, doing laundry. Like, I knew before this that laundry was not a super quick process, and when it's called wash day, it's because it took you all day to wash your clothes. But I never really thought about having to wash the clothing outside. Now that I think about it, it's kind of stupid, because you didn't have indoor plumbing either, so it wouldn't really make sense to cart it inside just to cart it all back outside. But again, things you don't really think about because you don't really have to. But I also would have been the uncoordinated mess that I would have, washed my clothing in the process of trying to go hang it out to actually dry. I would have dragged it through the dirt, and then I would have to have washed it again. I would have been really mad because I'd have to do the whole process all over again, and it's not a particularly quick process. Now, in theory, both the kitchen and the wash at Traveler's Rest were probably not things that I would have to think about, because those are things that I wouldn't be doing. It's one of those things, slaves were on plantations, and they were doing farming, and that's it. That's all slaves did, especially in the South. But this location kind of turns that narrative on its head, because you did have slaves here, and they weren't farming. They weren't out in the fields picking cotton. Like, that's not a thing here. So you had the nanny's cabin. The nanny was a slave that took care of the children. And I mean, you sit there, oh, she was the nanny, she got paid to take care of the kids. No. When we hear nanny, that's what we think. No. She was not paid. She was a slave. She took care of the kids because that's what she was told to do. And then you have the slaves that worked in the kitchen, that cleaned up the house, took care of making sure that the guests had what they needed. So they were much more of the domestic aspect, the house slave. But here there wasn't really the distinction between a field slave and a house slave, because there wasn't really a field for slaves to be working in. Yeah, it was just made me think about a lot of things that I'm sitting there like, I'm pretty blessed to live with the technologies that I do have, because I'm a brat and I will fully accept that. Knowing what I know now, having to live like that, I would be grumpy all the time. Now, if that's what I grew up knowing, it'd probably be a little different. But those stairs, man, those would have killed me. It's like done over with. I think I'm kind of fixated on those stairs because I kind of die on like normal height stairs, and those were like gargantuan stairs. So I was a little upset that I didn't get up into the attic, in part because that was one of the things that in that little informational video, one of the last, I believe she grew up in the house, or she grew up playing around the house, I can't remember exactly, but she was saying that that's one of her favorite places in the entire house was the attic. And so, like, I really wanted to see it, and of course, not thinking, hey, there's no electricity, there's probably no lights up there. I was just like, ooh, let's go into the attic. But there's no windows up there, so there's no light. Which is kind of strange if you're playing in the attic with no light. But, beside the point, just something didn't really think about, like, hey, you need light to see where you're going. And narrow staircases in the dark, yeah, not my jam. Not my jam at all.